Welcome to Gita Wisdom. I'm your host, Joshua Greene.
This is a very, very special evening for me. I've been waiting for this for a long time. We were supposed to have Elsie as our guest literally a year ago, and something came up that kind of just put that plan on hold. And so finally, we're able to reschedule um, someone who has been a dear friend and mentor for, let's see, Elsie, you and I met in 1999. So that's, what is that, 22, 23 years? There we go. So we were about 6 years old when we first met. It's
You
amazing.
don't look a year older, darling.
I know. So I don't usually read bios because, you know, the guests that we have on these programs are generally friends, but Elsie's resume reads like an encyclopedia. She's done so much in her career that I felt the only way to do it justice in a short period of time would be to condense it down to a few lines. So bear with me. I'm going to read this, which is an unusual thing, and it's Elsie, a sign of respect for you. Elsie Maio is one of the world's leading advisors to corporations seeking to bring soul wisdom into their business. She is known for her uncanny insights into emerging trends. Her company's soul branding system, and you can go to soulbranding.com, have guided niche clients to lead in such diverse arenas as social impact banking, gender lens investing, environmentally sensitive household products, and public and private national infrastructure. She is a frequent guest on national media such as Marketplace and American Public Radio, and is frequently cited in the Wall Street Journal, American Banker, and the Journal of Business Ethics. She most recently has served as a voice for the New Narrative and has been a guest in the provocative webinar programs of Humanity Rising and Future Capital. Do join me in welcoming our very special guest to this edition of Gita Wisdom, Elsie Maio. Elsie, I think you and I have talked enough about this that we can permit ourselves to go straight to the chase. Here's the deal. Here's the bottom line. In your very distinguished career, you have been the person who has helped Fortune companies, and by Fortune, I don't mean Fortune 500, I mean Fortune 100, Fortune 50, some of the biggest corporations in the world, and I know your client list is international in scope, in rethinking their brand strategy, in reassessing their role in the larger community. Then something happened. And you described this to me, and you took my breath away when you talked about this. Something happened to you, and I'm not even going to try and summarize it. I'm just going to ask you to describe for us in your own words, what was the change that occurred for you after having achieved this very distinguished career as a consultant to top international corporations and businesses? What happened? No pressure here. Just
No, I'm reliving the moment. I mean, it's thank you. And thank you for having me.
pleasure.
Well, I'd like to preface this just by saying that I want whatever I have to say and contribute today to be relevant to those of you who are here. So please jump into the chat, raise your hands, whatever, if you have questions while I'm talking or want clarification, whatever. Like, let's make this as valuable as possible. So what happened to me is, I guess, you know, the momentum and machinery that had driven me from being a major in classics to Wall Street. Oh, Charlene Michelle, hello. To literally helping Fortune 10, 50 companies make billions of dollars more than they would have. and me living the material dream that I had only aspired to as the child of a working class family. My father was a New York City fireman, my mother a homemaker. And I had a bug, like there's something for me to prove and achieve and attain. And I did. And one day I woke up and I felt like I had ashes in my mouth. So what happened to me? I honestly can't describe it except to say that I saw the fruitlessness of the machinery, of the economic machinery. And I thought, this is not good. It doesn't feel good to me personally. By the way, I've achieved everything I thought would make me happy. The house in the Hamptons, a new Mercedes every 3 years, the apartment on Fifth Avenue. I'm in the Institutional Investor magazine, Wall Street Journal, blah, blah, blah. Why did I wake up feeling like shit one morning, like in my soul? And it was just that it was over, and I saw this is not going anywhere terribly productive. But I also knew something else, and I still know this, that the people who I had worked with, who were my clients, and these were C-suite executives at those companies. When I would get them alone in a room eye to eye to do our confidential interviews, they were longing just as I was to make a difference in this world and do the right thing. And but their office was steeped in this obligation, responsibility, and momentum, a prime directive of our society that really straitjacketed them. And let's face it, nobody gets forced to do this, but it's seductive. It's, we want success. And I thought, okay, well, this is it. I can't keep doing this. But what I can do is I can speak to their hearts. And I can give them what they need to sell their boards such that they can begin to turn their companies into generative citizens of the world. So that was 1999 when I sold the house in the Hamptons and went on what I thought would be a 6-month sabbatical to write the economic argument for social responsibility. And that I would give it to the CEOs and they would sell it to their boards, and then we could start the transformation. Anyway, but I answered more than your question. You asked me what brought me to the point where I stopped doing that.
No, that was a very succinct description of a complex experience. It seems that this change of heart, I guess I would describe it from hearing you, took place right around the time you and I met, which was in 1999. And at that time, Elsie, what I remember of the spirit and business scene is that it was really just getting underway. If I remember correctly, what brought you and me together was the Spirit in Business Conference. And I think it was at the Hilton Hotel. And it took us about a year and a half to put that together. And just as the conference was scheduled to begin, 9/11. And I remember talking with you about, do we still go through this? What has things changed? Is it still relevant? The world is talking, terrorism now and world war and invasions and so on. Does this still matter? Is this still something of relevance? And I remember we all came to an agreement that it did, that the world did not have to shift politically for people to want a different kind of life for themselves. And I remember listening to you doing one of your presentations in the Hilton and sitting back and marveling at how effectively you penetrated into the heart of issues that companies wanting to be a part of this new movement were confronting. how do they justify this to their shareholders? That was kind of the number one issue. If we go green now, or if we become part of the bigger environmental issue, if we become a more socially responsible company, if that risks impacting our bottom line, we're never going to be able to survive. Our investors, our shareholders, our board are never going to let us do this. So at the time, we're going back 22 years now or whatever, it was a huge shift in the direction of corporate America. What's happened in the interim? I mean, you've remained extraordinarily active in this world. And I'm very curious to know, and I'm sure our guests here this evening are curious to know, what has remained the same? What has changed over the course of those 2 decades? What have you seen? What have your eyes seen in corporate America over the last 20 years?
I've seen gestures. I've seen huge disappointments. I've seen the shattering of trust. I've seen the machine is still in place. The prime directive is to maximize profit. I'm talking about listed companies primarily, okay?
Okay.
And yeah, I'll just leave it at that. When the prime directive is still maximize profit. Now, within that construct, the spirit of humanity, as it manifests in business, has been trying to make a difference, but it's been at the margins. And frankly, the aspiration to make a difference has been expressed in communications, marketing, and branding in its fullest expression. And the behaviors have been quite the opposite and often contradictory. So you see, for example, we have seen for the past 20 years an increase in a whole line of business for marketing, reporting on corporate responsibility, reporting on sustainability, and a whole industry around PR, reporting, marketing, and branding. And that has in many ways been put in front of corporate behaviors as if it reflected corporate behavior. I'm speaking to you as an insider. I've sat at the meetings where these things happen, and the spirit of the company, the people of the company really want the company to be this thing. But there has been allowed a discontinuity between what it says and expresses in its iconography and its marketing and the experiences, the emotionality of it that it creates in the marketplace and the impacts of what the companies are still doing. So I speak to you as someone who's very saddened for the 20 years. There have been, yes, there have been incremental improvements, but I think, frankly, the pandemic has done us the favor of ripping the veil off our faces and our eyes. And we see, what is this world that we're living in, where people who live in the United States are $400 away from a financial crisis. 40% of the population living from paycheck to paycheck. The child poverty, hunger, maternal deaths. I mean, we lead the free world, quote unquote, the developed world in maternal deaths. But look at Black Lives Matter. Thank God that it's come to a head. So I'm saddened, but I'm happy that we're sitting here with our wounds, revealing the truth of who we've been and what our system is. So that's That's the downer part of the presentation. There is a positive side, but thanks for the chance to express some of that.
We had to do that first, and I'll tell you why. I'm I'm privileged to know a lot of the people who have joined us here this evening. And without mentioning any names, I know that a number of our guests this evening are fed up with their jobs. I mean, there are people on this discussion tonight who have come right out and told me they don't want it anymore. They like, I suspect it's something like what you went through 20 years ago, that they don't want to be contributing to the static and the clutter, the intellectual, emotional, and societal clutter. They don't want their skills, their talents, their energies to be going for that any longer. And yet, what can they do? They're caught between a rock and a hard place. Either do you just jettison a job and risk going into debt, or not being able to care for the people who depend on you? You know, when do the realities of our life defeat the noble values and ambitions of our heart? How do you reconcile those things? It's very, very difficult. And I'm wondering, just going right to the heart of this, if there aren't some words of solace or encouragement or appreciation that you might have. In the back of my head are memories of the moments when you and I have been with Radhanath Swami,
Mm-hmm.
who is likely the one person on the planet I know who has managed to reconcile the head and the heart for more people than you can count. I don't think we can imitate that, but I do think that there must be something that you can say that would be of consolation, of solace to the people with us this evening who are confronting a very, very real dilemma.
Yeah, I'll share with you my personal, how I'm getting through it, because I've gone through another one of my epiphanies more recently, which is my threshold for participating at all in business is really strained. So I'll share with you some personal experiences and what I'm doing to cope with that. And then I'll share with you what turns me on about these times. And it's my feeling for myself is I am allowing myself to feel the moment, which is the decline of a system, the truth of something that really doesn't work and hasn't for a while. And it's just hitting me in waves. I had no idea about the racism in me until this question of Black Lives Matter came up. And I really am challenged, like every moment, to look at all of my assumptions, biases, and unconscious biases. And I'm in a way, I'm grateful for the quiet of the pandemic because I have time to go inward and space to go inward and look at that. And maybe in a way, we're all looking more deeply in these moments of pause. But then again, there is such a marvelous foment of the kind of transformation that I certainly want to see in business happening. And I'll share that with you. And we've got some links and resources too. And as to that second part, the way I make my mind feel okay about what's going on is I say, all right, if there is a path forward to a world that actually is thriving together, where we're all thriving together, What might that look like? And how might I be thinking about the clusters of activity that either are signposts that it's going on in that direction, or maybe inflection points where I can make a contribution. So, I'll give you those two things. My emotional life, I need to handle that like now. I'm sure you all do. And then there's when we feel stable enough with that, what is there out there that is cause for even celebration and perhaps the future path we want to take? I'd like to ask, how is all this resonating with people? Like,
With our guests this evening?
yeah. Like, what are there questions that are coming up now?
We can do that. That's the lovely thing about the format of these Gita Wisdom get-togethers is we're not obliged to wait till the end. In fact, I apologize. I was so excited about introducing Elsie. I forgot our housekeeping announcements. If you have a question, you're welcome to type it into the chat box. I'll give it immediate attention and we'll talk about it. Or you can, is there a raise your hand function here, Alicia? No, we don't have that. We can open this up to direct questions, but let's start by getting people to send your questions in the chat box. Let's start with that. And while we're waiting for people to do that, Elsie, I'm gonna take you up on your offer. Let's get into it. What was it? In a very practical way, what was this new epiphany that you've gone through?
I guess I see a tremendous momentum out there, and I'm sure you all do too, around our cultures recognizing, acknowledging that there's something that doesn't work. Like, people are talking about shifting from share owner capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. And people are talking about purpose. We need to become purposeful companies. And in the investment world, there is a rush to investments that conform with something called ESG factors: environmental, social, and governance risk factors. So and the financial industry is just like pushing, great, we've got new product, or let's just relabel old funds and call them ESG, make a few tweaks here and there. So my latest epiphany is this could really go in the wrong direction. We could just magnify through AI, for example, which will magnify our values. AI simply will replicate the biases that go in. And if the current assumptions, the prime directive goes in, we will get so much more of that will be buried in it. It'll be really hard to dig our way out of it. So, I reached another one of those moments of this could go the wrong way. And where is the next inflection point? So I really pulled back in this pandemic year. And now I'll go to the first part of what I was going to talk about, which is personally how to handle this stuff. And then I'll talk about the opportunities in 3 different clusters, okay?
Sure.
And Joshua, keep me honest. Like, if the chat box says, we'd rather hear about something else, let me know, okay? I'm not going to look at the chat box unless you direct me.
Be your port parole here.
My what?
I'll carry the word to you.
Thank you. Okay, so personally, I really had to look. I was frightened by the pandemic. I'll be 70 in December. I'm an elder. I have a, I don't know if you'd consider an underlying condition, but I feel vulnerable in terms of my immune system. So when the pandemic hit in New York, I got really scared. I mean, I saw all those refrigerated tractor trailer trucks full of corpses because there was nowhere to wake them or bury them. And so I became very conservative. I retreated. And then I had to look at what is most important to me. This is survival. I'm at the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy right now. This is my physical survival. And so I came to appreciate the need for me to exercise, to really up my own inner work, my practice in meditation. And I thought, how can I do that? I thought, well, I can do that by regularly, I can do it by teaching it. If I teach it, then I'll probably won't have to rely on my own self-discipline. And so I started looking out in my neighborhood at where I could also make a contribution. And so rather than my usual business strategy at, the high 50-foot level, I looked at my neighbors, I looked at levels of stress. And so I started teaching meditation classes and giving meditation live on Facebook. I decided if I'm going to live another 10, 15, 20, 25 years, I better be physically active. So it's my intention to become a yoga teacher. So what this pandemic did is it brought me back into my body. And anyway, so there's that on a personal level. It caused me to look in my community. And for example, in my apartment building, places where, how can I make things better here and now? And notice that our trash rooms are not as consistently sanitary as they could be. So another tenant and I started a committee, and now we're working on not only standardizing the sanitary conditions in the compactor room, but it's building a sense of community in our apartment complex. And this, I realized, oh my God, this is what I've been preaching for business to do. Guess what? Now I get a chance to do it myself and to understand and feel it. So I don't know if that's helpful. I mean, to your question about how to deal with things, but I think.
Absolutely. Look, what you've just said, if I can reiterate it, is that you saw a degree of hypocrisy, that corporate clients were using the rubric, the veneer of corporate social responsibility to really just put a good face on old habits. And if I'm understanding you, there was a kind of introspection that took place for you, that you went inside the circumstances of your own life locally and found ways to practice what you've been preaching. And I think that's pretty cool. There is a question. Let me forgive me if there's some static visually on the image here. I'm just going to read a question that came up in the chat box. I share Elsie's perspective and experience. Even today, the focus during the pandemic is more on economic results than on health of the population. So much so that I decided to become a Chopra Global Instructor, and am now a certified trainer in perfect health Ayurvedic lifestyle. So glad I did. Helps me with my physical, mental, and spiritual health, and to share that with others. So I think your point about just getting back into your own body, listening to what's happening in your personal ecosphere, the personal ecology has been important.
Thank you for that comment, and which is a perfect segue to the second piece of what I was hoping to share with you all, which is what are the three realms in that cause me some optimism and opportunities for action. And those three are personal, organizational, and societal. And, and embodiment, the personal embodiment is really, for me, the foundation of us coming into a sense of oneness with the world. My friend Neela, who's on the call here, Neela and Frederica and I have a call every other week, and we talk about this integration of body, mind, and spirit. And we see it, by the way, I mean, when you look out in society, this notion of embodiment is becoming in our Western culture increasingly embraced, whether it's through yoga or the notion of, well, you know what? I'm going to read this poem right now.
Please go right ahead.
This morning, I'm going to read it because I find it summarizes the spirit of where I think the spirit of our culture can go and is yearning to go. And it starts with this notion of embodiment. And then we'll look and see how how this translates into organizational strategy, and with a couple of cases, and also societal, if that's okay.
Please.
Okay. You all probably know this. I'm not going to tell you the title or the poet yet because I want you to just really feel it if you're open to doing that right now. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things.
My goodness, how beautiful.
Yeah, this is Mary Oliver, Wild Geese.
Mhm.
I share that with you because for all of the amazing progress I'm going to tell you about in the other two sectors, organizational and societal, amazing momentum in the direction I think we'd like. We won't get there unless we embody this. Because it has the imagination of the human spirit as one with the web of life is essential to create a way of being where we all thrive as the web of life. I'm convinced of that. As we were preparing for this, Joshua, you reminded me of one of our teammates, Ravi Chowdhury, who was a chairman of several of the Tata companies. I think you may know the Tata are the very powerful conglomerates.
One of
based in
India's
India.
largest and most powerful corporate conglomerates.
So Ravi is one of those leaders who recognizes that the shift that's needed in leadership is not a shift of mindset, it's a shift of what he calls heart set. Now, I also would like to say this is why I'm really excited to be invited to speak to this group, because your community understands spirit, understands heart set, and is moved by it and lives by it. And I say that the dominant Western culture has forced itself to compartmentalize that. And that is the source of the problem.
Well, about this, let me read you a question that came into the chat box just a moment ago. Is it realistic to expect that any business endeavor rooted in global free market capitalism can engage in the kind of social responsible practices that will re-enfranchise, interesting word, will re-enfranchise blue-collar workers in middle America whose identity, to say nothing of livelihood, have been vacated by a technology-driven economy to the point of fueling the reactionary populist extremism that has come to a head over the last 4 years? Okay, that's not a question, that's a PhD thesis.
I totally get it.
Yeah,
It's the right question. It's
yeah,
the
it
right
is.
question.
Yeah,
And
Hari Kirtan, congratulations. You've summed up the human condition in 10 lines. Very good. What do you think, Elsie?
first of all, it's not a free market economy. This is not a free market. When business buys regulation, it's not a free market. When monopolies, such as we see in the technology sector, stifle other voices, it's not a free market.
Right. And when gerrymandering rearranges things in such a way that the impressed powers, the powers in control, stay in control and grow stronger in the name of, voting rights or restricting voting rights.
Yeah. Do you call it a free market when look at our healthcare system? There's no competition there.
Well, what Hari Kirtan has drawn attention, shown a spotlight on here is, I think, the danger inherent in that system. It raises the energy on both sides of the aisle. Boy, oh boy, we risk falling into a kind of a whirlpool, where it just kind of gets worse and worse and worse of its own energy and inertia. Let me take a practical example. A few years ago, there was a photocopying company that sponsored a corporate retreat, and then they went up to a lake in upstate New York. And as they were sitting meditating around the banks of this lake, there was a photocopy machine that someone had thrown into the lake. And all of these bits and pieces just kind of started deteriorating and were polluting, the whole bank of the water. It prompted the thought, can we create a photocopy machine made from recycled materials, biodegradable materials? I'd like to think that in this rather grim picture, it's grim but realistic, unfortunately, what you've been describing, there are people in power who recognize the danger of what we've created here, the kind of Frankenstein monster of so-called free market capitalism. You've had a very, very privileged insider perspective on this. Can you offer any reassurance? I mean, are there got to be some good guys out there? Is there an energy building that can counter this, same as it ever was, bottom line oriented fever?
Yeah. And now that moves us into the three clusters that show some glimmers of effective impact and leverage. One of them I'll talk about in investments. And yes, there are good guys. You know what? The good guys are the brave guys. You got to be a leader. And this relates back to the first cluster, which is personal. Each of us really needs to look deep and ask the question, if I were living my values fully, what would I be doing differently? And what of those options would have the kind of impact that I think can start to move the needle? Each of us has to do that. So now I'll move to different sectors in the field of education. And there are models, and don't think that most of them are in the US. The one I'm going to talk about is called Bildung, and it is expressed and nurtured and energized very effectively today by someone named Lene, L-E-N-E, Rachel Anderson, who is a Danish woman who co-wrote The Nordic Secret. You can Google her. I think I forgot to put her in the list of resources. At any rate, just to give you a shorthand version of what is Bildung. Bildung is a form of education that literally empowers children in their personal agency and in the skill of discernment. I won't say too much more, except to let you know this startling fact that she shared with me. We spoke on a panel together at Future Capital. I think that's in the links that Anna was going to share. Just to give you an example of what Bildung can do, Rosa Parks, our American heroine, who decided not to give up her seat on the bus and then helped spur the civil rights movement, if you all know who I'm talking about, that Rosa Parks, the Black woman. When she was asked, what gave you the courage not to give up your seat? She said, you know, I was very lucky as a child. There was a special program of education given, I forget where, it was out of state from where her state, and it was, and I was educated there. And that gave me a sense of to listen to my own inner self. It was a Bildung program that had been brought over from the Nordics. Now, that just gives you a sense of what this kind of program is. So a bright light is that work. It's an education movement, and it's now moving into the States. You can look up Lene. Another area, investments. Now, like I said before, you're going to find yourself confused with all of these opportunities to make a difference, quote unquote, in these ESG branded funds. We'll take a look at, and by the way, I'm sorry, but we don't even have a consistent way of defining what the impacts are that would constitute good environmental, social, and governance behaviors. There's a plethora of those conflicting standards. It's coming together, but it's not there. Don't be fooled. But you want to see where you could have leverage? Take a look at what Morgan Simon, a woman investor, is doing. When you think about how to marshal power as an investor, she has helped organize the movement that convinced banks to stop funding private prisons. In the chat, you'll find a list of resources. One of them is ICCR, the Interfaith Council of, I think it's called Corporate Responsibility, who for decades have been, because they have pension funds, putting their funds to put proxies before management teams and boards that have environmental impacts and social impacts. So there are ways for you to be an activist and also to participate in society. There are other movements. Let's say you have a business, you're an entrepreneur, you're thinking about that. Take a look at what Mandy Cabot, C-A-B-O-T, has done and is doing. She and her husband founded a company called Dansko, Dansko, near Philadelphia. Years ago, they make clogs, shoes. And some of you are familiar with them. What's notable here is that from the beginning, they thought, well, he's an architect trained in agriculture. They made a green factory, a green building. This was years and years ago, one of the first. And then they thought, well, we're not going to be in this business together, but we don't want it to just be a generator for the 1% if we sell it. They converted it into employee owned. There are so many wonderful things that are happening that are tangible, doable. They went down to Belize. They saw this amazing forest. They thought, wow, this is about to be clear cut. So what did they do? They bought a farm near it and have converted the farm so that the farm will essentially fund the preservation of the forest. There are extraordinarily wonderful and creative things going on. It is a question of imagination and courage. And that's why working on ourselves first to clear the biases and to find the courage to imagine. There are some wonderful movements in that direction. You might have heard of Thomas Hubel. You'll hear words like trauma healing. You know, whatever the residuals, even not only of us personally, but of our culture of colonialism has left in us, in our psyche, has, you know, what are we still believing of a rising tide floats all boats? We were brought up on that. And that's why we would look at the stock market ticker going across the screen of the news and say, oh, that must be good. The stock market's going up. Guess what? It's not going up for everybody. It doesn't make a difference to most people, to their well-being. In fact, it may be detrimental because it's concentrating wealth and power further at the 1%.
This is a perfect bridge into the next question in our chat box here. And this is from someone who knows what he's talking about. This is a dear friend and professor at the Zarb School of Business at Hofstra. Is income reality the main culprit behind the divisiveness in the country? And if the current corporate culture is partly to blame, how can we change it? And then he gives this example. He says, Elizabeth Warren has a plan where she's pushing to have corporate boards represented with 50% employees, similar to German supervisory boards. In your experience, can that be a partial solution? Without a more egalitarian society, can we expect any progress?
And it should say income inequality at the first part.
Yes, I interpreted that way. Thank you so much. I think that when we look at what needs to change, governance is one of them. And I was just reading something to that effect. I'm going to read it for you. Well, maybe I don't have it right here. At any rate, populating boards so that they actually represent the populations that are affected by the outcomes that are generated. Whether it's 50% employees or a quarter employees, a quarter community representatives, I don't know. But the essence here is recognizing that power is not distributed effectively enough. And boy, what is it going to take for that to happen? You know, one of the great thinkers on this and practitioners is named Jed Emerson. I don't know, Anoop, if you know him or of him. His last book is called The Purpose of Capital. And I'm looking at it now. Babson College has collaborated with him to create basically a teaching guide to this book. And it starts with asking very fundamental questions like that about sharing power. Like, if one were truly interested in transforming one's company, how would one ensure that those who were being affected by it were actually being part of the decision process, not the remediation process. And there's other exciting work being done with what's called warm data. Now, decisions made at
What is warm data?
warm data is essentially what is actually happening to people as a result of what's being decided. I have a slide I'd love to show you that illustrates this. Do we have time for that?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. This is what I consider warm data. If you're a company that makes food, consumer products, and you're considering what's the cost of a meal so that I can understand how to price my product, do you ever ask these questions? Like, what does it cost a woman in Africa to make a meal in terms of the time that she cannot spend in school because she has to go gather wood to fire up the stove? What does it cost in terms of her personal safety and dignity when she has to go out at night alone and worry about predation? What does it cost in terms of the fumes that she is inhaling over these cooking apparatuses? What does it actually cost? How much of the income is spent on fuel? So when we think about warm data and we look at our products and services, do we ever really take a look at the real human cost? This is a benefit of technology that is available to us now if we change the prime directive. The prime directive is to maximize shareholder value, under the assumption a rising tide raises all boats. Now, people can say, and branding can tell you, oh, no, we've switched to the stakeholder model. Prove it to me. What are your metrics that go into your decision process? Is it this? I don't know if that answers your question, Anouk.
Well, I think what you
Thank you.
please
Yeah,
go right ahead, Anu.
this is a great screenshot.
Elsie, I'm going to move right along. That was another very provocative point you're raising. I want to make sure that I get people's questions in here. This is a long one. Bear with me. I'm reading the book Tribe, and the book cites a 1965 study by Charles Fritz about civilian response after World War II air raids. His theory is that modern society has gravely disrupted the social bonds that have always characterized the human experience, and that disasters thrust people back to a more ancient, organic way of relating. They create a community of sufferers that allow individuals to experience an immensely reassuring connection to others. Class differences are temporarily erased. Income disparities become irrelevant. Race is overlooked, and individuals are assessed simply by what they are willing to do for the group. It is a fleeting utopia, enormously gratifying to the average person and downright therapeutic to people suffering from mental illness, end quote. Although I'm deeply saddened, our guest writes, by the suffering of the pandemic, personally, I feel less lonely because more people are beginning to embrace the values we here have always valued. Prior to this, I was often depressed by existential loneliness. It is strange, isn't it? That sometimes it requires that we enter collectively into a position of extreme risk, extreme danger, to put the realities of life into some different perspective. That's a very strange quality about us human beings. It's as though, you can't cure a cold, but you can cure pneumonia or something. Why are we condemned, Elsie, from your experience, to living, in our own detritus until some extreme situation comes along like the one we've been in to force us to reassess whether we've actually created the world we've ever wanted. Isn't there some way of making healthy self-analysis the norm instead of the exception?
Well, in my utopia, which I hope the current crisis will help propel us toward, we will measure effectiveness in terms of well-being. And what is well-being? It depends on, every atom in the living system, in the web of life, has its own equilibrium that determines well-being. I think of it as a bubble. It's like a yin-yang bubble, and it's continuous, it's dynamic. My physical well-being, your physical well-being are a dynamic interplay of gazillions of factors. And the same thing is true of an organization. The same thing is true of the natural world, of a plant, of a tree. There are so many dynamics always operating, and this is the beauty of life. It's a dynamic impulse to maximize and collaborate simultaneously. What's our job if that's true? Certainly not consumption. Certainly not continuous growth and accumulation of material things. No, our job is to help maintain a healthy well-being, a healthy equilibrium. In the human being, what does that look like? We have the technology to understand what does it take for a 3-year-old. What are the conditions that will enable a 3-year-old to thrive into a thriving adult in every dimension? Why don't we care about that more than what does it take, to make a sugary cereal affordable? This is a question of choice, and we are at this beautiful crisis moment to look at what makes a difference for us as a society and individually.
Boy, oh boy, this is going right down to the heart of things.
We're not alone. I mean, and I did want to be optimistic here. We don't have to create this from scratch, by the way. And this is part of, there are lots of organizations who have been thinking about this for a while and have some good suggestions. One of them, the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. I didn't put this link in, but you could look it up. Wellbeing Economy Alliance. How to design economic policies that put the well-being of people and the planet first. Now, this could be bullshit. And this would be typical BS for the past 20 years, except I looked inside and I thought, what are they proposing to measure? And boy, okay, how about this one? Use participatory budgeting or other democratic methods to assess whether public provisions align with public well-being priorities and values. Hello, that's democratizing budgeting in communities. So this was the third part that I wanted to offer some encouragement. It's not, we're not totally flat-footed in this, but if we don't get the guts, every single one of us, to shift from consumer to citizen, the machine will just roll us over.
Well, that's what I'm getting out of this discussion, Elsie, is that there's a consistent theme here that change begins on the local level, that we have to look at our own backyard and see how we've been living. And I think the questions in the chat box are reflecting that as well. I mean, people are asking, is it not a very personal issue, not not a national agenda, not something that's going to be addressed through comprehensive legislation. I can't recall an instance when government mandated change has actually done anything to reform the human heart. And I think back to the malfeasances of the early 2000s when the Enrons and the others were found to have so heinously betrayed their own workers and their own pension funds. And at that time, there was this series of legislations enacted called Sarbanes-Oxley.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Mhm.
I think the idea in principle was that these would be strict guidelines to reform corporate behavior, making companies more transparent, more accountable, more consistent with corporate goals and the well-being of the larger community around them. And what we found is that maybe some industries adhere to that to some extent, but it basically just made a lot of lawyers rich because they help corporate heads circumvent more efficiently the new legislation because hearts had not changed. At the end of the day, I love the some of the texts that we read in our Gita Wisdom group that talk about issues that may seem to be external, really as issues that are internal. It's a personal reform that's needed before any larger reform can be effected. We have a comment here in the chat box. It would be better. Thank you, Kaminia. It would be better if sugary cereals were expensive. The food desserts in America are shocking. My husband and I have driven through them. Oh, the food deserts in America are shocking. My husband and I have driven through them on our cross-country tours. By food desert, I mean the inability to find fresh produce in stores, only packaged, highly processed food. As a European, it was shocking to me. Right. I think stupid food makes for stupid minds. I wonder, I wonder how closely aligned diet is with what we're talking about. The resistance to reform, the resistance to change attitudes, habits, behaviors. That may seem naive or some kind of a stretch, but I'm playing off of what Kamania wrote here. Sometimes it feels very overwhelming, doesn't it? You know, the reform is on so many needed, is on so many levels.
You know what? That's why I keep going back to spirit. Think about the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law. In Europe, the approach to accounting, for example, has much more been around spirit, whereas the United States accounting system has been so precise. And because it's so precise, one assumes that if you can fall between two rules, you'll get away with things, and you do. So there's, you know that I love the Greek tragedies, right? And that I'm, in fact, in a class 2 times a week reading them now. And the lessons are just so relevant today. It's kind of the same thing. One of the questions I have, first of all, let me just back up. It's a question of leadership. What we know from being the marketing masters of the world, and in the US, we know how many pixels of ice blue in the sweat that's painted on a refrigerator selling Coca-Cola it will take for you to buy a Coke at the point of sale. We know how to manipulate each other. We know how to speak to each other's emotional vulnerabilities and traumas. Who's deciding that? This is the leadership void. Yeah. This is the leadership void. And it's also a question of personal discernment and personal agency. Yeah. So again, I go back to if our leaders won't do it, we have to do it ourselves personally.
Yeah, you remind me of uh, uh, Michael Moore's most recent film called Where to Invade Next.
Yeah.
I'm not a big Michael Moore fan because I can't buy into his politics 100%. But in that film, Where to Invade Next, he's done an extraordinary job of looking at measures of reform happening elsewhere in the world that he's convinced can be transposed back into the United States. I recommend that for those of you who are with us this evening, interested in seeing alternative forms of prison behavior, alternative forms of education, alternative forms of food and diet. It's extraordinary what other countries do. Healthcare. It's extraordinary what's happening elsewhere in the world that really is achieving the kinds of results I think any sane person would want to see. Look, I'm a big fan of what uh, uh, the founder of the Body Shop, drawing a blank. What was her
Need
name?
erotic.
Yeah, Anita Roddick used to say, if you think one individual is too small to make a difference, you've never been in bed with a mosquito. I think citing Rosa Parks or citing any individual who has actually been at the forefront of a major movement is important. We need those examples. We need to be reminded that it is possible for us to become one of those agents of change. When I'm invited to speak in yoga studios, okay, I don't believe that that small group of people, it's usually not more than 30, 40 people, are there by accident. I think it's taken lifetimes for people to reach a point where they're prepared to sit in a class and discuss seriously the notion of shifts in our behavior, both personal and communal and national, and discuss ways to walk that talk. I think people come to a spiritual path because they've reached a point in their own spiritual evolution where they have the opportunity to become agents of change. I think those of us on this call tonight are in that category. I think listening to what you have to say, and thank you for being so open about sharing your experiences and your personal journey, is critical as an encouragement for the rest of us that, maybe I can do more than I think. I think maybe that's the message of the Bhagavad Gita. The message of Bhagavad Gita is don't judge your capabilities by some intellectual assessment. Ultimately, we're capable of things when we move from the dictates of the heart, not the head. And when that happens, resources out there in the universe have a place to go to that you might not have ever imagined available. That's the kind of encouragement I think we all need. That there's more to what we can do than what we think ourselves capable of doing. We have another comment here. And what to speak of the heavily, we're back into the food industry. Okay. And what to speak of the heavily government subsidized dairy industry in the US? They produce such an excess and they dump it into the school system, as in sell it. And the children are fed unhealthy quantities of dairy products. Yeah, the reform is needed on so many levels. I think that's something also in Michael Moore's film. He goes inside schools where they're actually fed healthy foods, where students actually get fresh fruits and vegetables.
Yes.
Such a revolutionary idea, feeding young people healthy foods. Well, Elsie, this is absolutely an eye-opener here. I want to go back to a couple of questions that I've been holding on to that I've wanted to ask you. How does someone know? Let's say we have people in our audience here in our little group this evening. How do you know when the time has come to change careers? How do you know when the time has come to make a radical shift, not a small shift? Small shifts, okay, fine. A radical shift is scary. That's really scary. Are there indicators? I mean, you've been through this yourself, and I think from what I know of you, you've been mentor to individuals and corporations that have gone through major shifts in their goals, objectives, agendas, directions. What are the indicators that the small stuff won't do it anymore? Something major is needed.
You know, it's a personal thing. You know, there's a school of thought that says people don't change unless they perceive that staying the same will hurt more than the change.
Okay.
So, in the case of organizations, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, you know, is this going to be more detrimental to your business to stay the same? And then there are ways to minimize the risk. On a personal level, it really is, you know, the more one is present, conscious of one's feelings, you'll know. But really the question is the path there. Is it a leap or are you going to be incremental? For myself, there was always something that drove me. And it was, I always wanted to know, how does that work? I want to know how it works. And I cared about that more than thinking about what it was going to take to find out. And so I would, for example, leapfrog jobs, like, you know, sell myself into a job that I was not qualified for. But I knew that I could learn quickly because I really wanted that thing. And I think appetite and getting in touch with personal appetite is crucial.
Oh,
You
what
know,
a fascinating idea. The notion that you may be in a job that isn't your ideal vocational calling, but there's something to be learned there. There are tools to be honed that you can take with you to your next destination. That's a very interesting idea.
well, there's that. And then the other thing is, in the meantime, how do you keep yourself intact? How do you keep your heart happy? In recent conversations, one of these webinars, someone was talking about what's your hobby? Like, make it your hobby. Make the thing that you're dying to do your hobby. Couple of things will happen. You'll start to acquire skills, whether you're volunteering or whatever. You'll start to acquire skills, but also your heart will start to feel satisfied that you're engaging in that activity while you're earning a living, if that's what you need to do.
My friend at Hofstra, Anup Rai, is a real innovator in this regard. He's introduced meditation classes into the Zarb School of Business. And the notion of meditation as a tool of progressive business just kind of really makes me chuckle. What a lovely idea that we may find ways of moving a corporate agenda forward by getting more deeply in touch with our own needs and goals and objectives. So let me ask you: is it possible then to reconcile our own spiritual progress with some corporate agenda, or is that just wishful thinking?
Well, it's what soul branding is based on. And I would say to Anoop, and I'm sure he knows, but you know, for everybody else's benefit, this notion of the internal self, being connected to the internal self and the spirit, has become a mainstream element of leadership development programs everywhere. And one of the leading practitioners is Otto Scharmer at MIT.
Right.
And this also came through Peter Senge
Yeah.
at MIT, servant leadership.
Yeah.
Soul branding is based on 13 values that in all of our work, when we ask the CEOs and the executives on your deathbed, what do you want to be known for having lived by?
Hmm.
They all basically said the same thing. They kind of different words. It's 13 deep values, and they're about contribution. So this, see, it's time. That's why I started this conversation saying it's about the spirit. It's about integrating the spirit, exactly what Anoop is doing, bringing the spirit to business. Yes, we can, and yes, we must. Bring our sense of humanity to ourselves day to day, but also to the business world. You know, the
You,
golden rule is another aspect of one aspect of that. And it is something that is promoted quite overtly by one of the leading partners in global business, Kim Pullman. Kim is a colleague. Her husband is Paul Pullman, who's, I think he's now chair of the B team and various UN initiatives. He was the CEO of Unilever, which we know made strides, enormous strides in sustainability. And Kim and Paul have a foundation now called Reboot the Future. And it's about bringing the golden rule and that consciousness into education.
we have a request, Elsie, in the chat box. Someone's asking where she can learn more about the 13 values that you mentioned, named by CEOs. Is that something they go to soulbranding.com and they can find more information about that?
Yes, if you go to soulbranding.com and you can go to the media page, there's a publication that I wrote in the Journal of Business Ethics that first explains them. But I talk about them in most of the things that I write. Also, on that same page, the media page, you'll find in the Marketing Journal publications articles about those values. Yeah. And if you have any other questions, just ask me, email me.
You do bring to mind for me a story of a company that I heard in Mexico that had fallen on hard times, and they were faced with possible failure. And what the CEO decided to do was shut down the company for a month. And during that month, brought together the entire employee population to find out what they thought the company needed to do. This was a company that delivered food into schools. Very apropos some of the comments that we've had this evening. The employees were very candid with him and said, look, you've been feeding sugar-based, fructose, corn syrup-based foods into schools. We're parents. We don't want our own children eating this stuff, let alone children in public and private schools. We should revamp our entire catalog, all of our products. We should be known as the healthy supplier of food to schools. He followed their advice, turned the company into an employee-based organization, as you had mentioned earlier, and they became one of the fastest growing and most profitable food companies in all of Mexico. Don't you like stories like that?
I do. You know, ask the mothers what's wanted and needed.
Yeah. Another comment in the box here, many ways of thinking appear to be evolving as the older generation gives way to younger generations. That's a conversation that's taking place across a lot of platforms. For example, racial and gender attitudes. Is there hope? Oh my gosh. Is there hope for business values in the younger generations? Wow. What a question.
The younger generations are leading. There was a piece that I published in a book called Brand Activism. And I opened with a letter to Jamie Dimon, who runs JP Morgan Chase, who had just issued a statement about values. You know, the world is way ahead of corporate values. And the millennials and younger generations, the next gens, are bringing those forward. The biggest wealth transfer ever is going to happen in the next 20 years as those generations inherit. And they will reshape the investment markets. They will reshape a lot. Think about when Google employees went on strike, I think it was 40,000 of them worldwide in 2018. When there was another one too, another technology company, it might've been Microsoft. And these are the younger tech employees. Right now, if you are a young talent, it's called, you've got leverage with your employer because they're all saying that talent is scarce. Bring your values forward. And for the rest of us, let's support these grassroots communities. It's very easy to find them online. Let's bring some solidarity to these issues. The fundament of the issues, the sharing of power. Maybe we don't talk about it that way. Maybe we talk about distributed decision-making. I don't know what the right words are. It depends on who you're talking to, but we know what we're talking about. And there are ways for us to support that.
Yeah, I suppose the good news is us old fogies are on our way out. We'll be gone in a few years. And the young ones are going to take over. That's great. It's something to look forward to.
Everybody from the angelic realms.
Yes, right. Oh, goodness. Well, let's see if we have Nina Hayes mentions Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, working with lots of CEOs and big companies. I'm not familiar with Greenleaf Center. Are you?
No, but I will look it up if you
yeah.
Put the link in the chat and I can get a copy.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, last question for you. If we're excited enough to want to be a part of this movement toward a kinder, gentler world, where would you suggest people go? I mean, you've given a number of references already that we've shared with the audience, but if people are specifically looking to get involved with some kind of an initiative, is there one place that comes to mind that has your utter confidence and you can say, go there, they'll have some great ideas for you?
I think it's, I don't think I have an answer for that. I did provide some links by topic area. Like if as an investor, you're interested in connecting with resources that I find are on the edge that we're talking about. In education, there are some links. For women's leadership, I put some. I don't know that there's, I'm really like taking a look inside, like, where do I go? I know for women's leadership, there's an organization called Women Agents of Change, led by Dorian Baroni, B-A-R-O-N-I.
Yes.
And that's very broad, the membership there, and they are extremely heartfelt and authentic. And I'll think about it and I'll send you an email.
Great, because
I hope we'll be more responsive than I can be now.
We do stay in touch with our guests, so even things that come in later can be circulated around. I as an experiment, I just did a search for Spirit in Business, which was the organization I think that brought you and me together 22 years ago or whenever. And I mean, you know, there's millions of entries there. There's a lot of work going on. And I think depending on someone's particular interest, you're right, search by interest rather than by organization and see who's already involved in your area of
or if you find an author who you think, now this guy resonates with me, follow them and see what they belong to. You know, like there's this book called Humankind by Rutger Bregman, which talks about, it's very optimistic, and it talks about the positive inclination of humans. We're hungry. I've been reading a book called Civic Longing. We're hungry to contribute and do the right thing. And it's those kinds of, when people feel that way and have that aspiration, then let's see how we organize.
Wonderful. So as a final note for our guests, if you're looking for spiritual practices, I would recommend here in New York, there's the Bhakti Center. If you go to thebhakticenter.org, I believe is the website. Is that right? Yeah, the Bhakti, BHAKTI, bhakticenter.org. They have a number of wonderful programs, including business-oriented workshops that might be of interest to you. There it is in the chat box. Alicia just posted that up for you all. I could not be happier that finally, it took us a year, but we finally were able to get Elsie back here to have this long overdue conversation about the intersection of corporate America and that place in the heart where each of us asks, what do I do now? It's interesting that the opening verse of the Bhagavad Gita, Dharma kshetre kurukshetre samaveta yuyutsava, is generally translated as, what did my sons and the sons of the opposing army do? Samaveta yuyutsava. In Sanskrit, the term yuyutsava means how are things done? But there's a more nuanced translation for that term. That is, how did they behave? So even though the story of the Bhagavad Gita is taking place on a battlefield, it wasn't so much what did the armies do, but how did they behave? What are their values? Are they respecting the codes of righteous warfare? Are they respecting their enemies? Are they entering into battle attempting to win for their side, but to do no harm more than necessary? There is a way to engage in everything, even warfare, that is reflective of higher human virtues. And I think, Elsie, spending time with you is an absolutely brilliant way of being reminded of that dimension of our being, that whatever we do, whatever our calling, whatever our vocation, career, responsibilities, field of action, there's a noble, righteous way of going about it. And maybe we'll be that little mosquito that ends up making the difference in the corporate body. You just never know. So thank you so much for being our guest this evening. Again, those of you who are joining us for the first time, Gita Wisdom is a listener-sponsored program. We come together these days once a month. Our guest next month is Ian McCaig, who is an extraordinary storyboard artist, artistic director, and animator. He is the key artistic mind behind the George Lucas Star Wars franchise. And Ian is going to be talking with us about storytelling as a path to self-awareness. So you're not going to want to miss that one. My thanks to Alicia for having kept us technologically on track. Elsie, for your time, wisdom, and insights, and to all of you for joining us once again for Gita Wisdom. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you. I wish you a pleasant evening and look forward to seeing you again next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joshua and Alicia and everyone who participated.
Thank you for listening to Gita Wisdom. For more information, please visit gitawisdom.org.